Zilch left, 35 Wichita Macho
Dice
Toe.
right, F5.
Dice right numbers, 3 Jet Spielberg.
Ready? Right. All right, and welcome back to episode 3 of the Pre-Snap Pressure podcast. I'm Nick Collazo, of course, joined by Ryan Shapiro. Ryan, football started.
It has in fact started. It was
That
not
makes
a
me
very
so
exciting game though.
Happy. It's still football. I don't care. There's more football this week, and then there's football every week until February.
I like that the
not-
biggest storyline. I like that the biggest storyline from that game was Trey Lance is on the Chargers.
Yeah. I'm not gonna lie. I saw the first play. I saw the guy fumble the kickoff, and I was like, I don't know. I don't have the best feeling. And then yeah, the Lions ended up getting destroyed. But it's a preseason game, so
I was
who
like,
cares?
yeah, preseason doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter. All right. Anyways, not the topic of today's episode. Today's episode topic is the Big 12. Probably top to bottom, one of the most open conferences, I'd say. I feel like there's like 8 or 9 teams that can win the conference. Like,
That's the right way to phrase it. It's the most competitive between each other.
I wouldn't say deepest, but it's there's the most parity in this conference when compared to every other conference.
Yeah, like you said, there's probably 8 to 10 teams that could very easily win the conference this year.
Yeah. So, as with the last 2 episodes, we're gonna go down all 16 teams in alphabetical order. We're gonna, show where me and you ranked them preseason with the rankings we put out, like 2 weeks ago at this point. And yeah, we'll talk about each team in detail, and at the end, we'll give conference championship predictions and anything else we have to say. All right. So first team is the Arizona Wildcats. Disappointing year last year. I guess just in all facets except for maybe their top 10 pick receiver, Ted McMillan, who's now with the Panthers. But we came into last season thinking Noah Fifita was going to be, a quarterback up for the Heisman race, and he just wasn't last year. They ended the season 4-8. And if I'm going to be honest, I don't see things getting any better, even if Fifita does improve to what a lot of people thought he could be last year. There's just a lack of playmakers on the offense that I just don't think it's going to be that good of a team.
Yeah, losing Tet was a big loss for Arizona, but I'm looking at the transfers on the offensive side that they brought in: Ishmael, Mahdi, Kean Burnett, and Luke Wysong and Chris Hudson. The playmakers specifically, Mahdi had almost 1,000 yards at Texas State last year at a 5.4 yards per carry average, and had 1,300 yards the year before as well. So he's coming off of 2 really good years for Texas State. Burnett, 18 catches for 200 yards. As a tight end in college, could be better, could be worse. He's coming from Kansas. They didn't really have the best season last year either. And you look at Wysong and Hudson, they both had, Wysong 840 and Hudson 680 yards. So 2 guys that were not the number 1 guys on their teams, but both had pretty productive seasons when they got the ball. So I think Arizona did a solid job in bringing some of those guys in.
Which they needed to, because outside of McMillan last year, their second highest receiver had only 323 yards. That's Chris Hunter this year, who I think will be better this year, but they just needed more playmakers at wideout. Because that, like I said, outside of Tet last year, there was really nobody.
Yeah. That's why, Fifita probably didn't have the season he wanted to last year. We were talking about it beforehand, and he had in the first game of the season against New Mexico, he had 420 yards and 4 touchdowns, and 300 of those yards went to Tet.
Yeah, that's just not. You can't just replicate that year to year. So I'm interested to see, I guess, what direction they go offensively, because they're a very pass heavy team the last few years essentially. But do they kind of stick that direction, or with the introduction of a good running back from the portal, do they kind of lead towards more the run? I don't know. It's an interesting offense to see. I just can't rank the team very highly.
No, there's no identity right now for this team. But I could definitely see a lot more of a balanced offense heading into this year. And they also brought in a couple of defensive transfers with from Texas with Tiao Lee Savea and Javion Cole. I'm pretty sure I butchered Savea's first name, but two guys that were obviously, former Longhorns, and a team that's really started to make its way back to its former self, and that could be two big pickups for them, or it could just be two nothing pickups for them.
All right, moving on to the defending conference champions, the Arizona State Sun Devils. They return what many people think will be a top 10 quarterback. They return what everybody should think is a top 5 wide receiver, but they don't have the scat pack anymore. And I feel like that's going to be a bigger loss than a lot of people think. I mean, just their whole offense, especially towards the end of the year, their whole offense was just, can we get Scatterboo the ball? How many different ways can we get Scatterboo the ball? And they just don't have that guy anymore. Now, I will say I think Jordan Tyson could easily go for 14 to 1,500 yards this year, and that'll probably alleviate some of the offense. I still think their defense is a pretty good one, so I still have them rated number 1, and I still think they're the favorites to win the conference going into the year.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. Number 1, Cam Scatterboo was probably one of the most exciting players in college football last year, minus probably Genty and Hunter.
You got a full experience of Scatterboo last year, didn't you?
Watching that the Texas Arizona State game was stressful towards the end, just because Scatterboo was, nuts. I thought he was concussed for half of that game. And he just was like, no, I might be, but I'm not going to let that deter me because I'm Cam Scatterboo. Nothing scares me. But you mentioned the loss of Scatterboo. They bring in Kanye Udo from Army, who was a big part of that awesome season from Army last year. Had multiple 100-plus yard games rushing, had 1,100 yards, averaged about 6 yards a carry. That's exactly the type of guy I feel like would work perfectly in this offense, because you can still lean on him for the run game. But like you said, you still have Jordan Tyson, who could easily go for 100-plus catches, 1,500-plus yards, and Sam Levitt, who's only going to get better this year. That was his first year starting, too, for Arizona State, and he led them to a conference title when everyone had them last. So, very exciting. Outlook for the offense this year, and you're returning a lot of guys on that O-line, and the defense, you're returning 10 of 11 guys.
Yeah, that defense, that when I said that was probably one of the better ones in the conference, I meant that. Going back to that Texas game that Ryan was just talking about, a lot of people just remember, it was the Scatterboo show on offense that willed them back in this game. Their defense had to hold Texas at points of that game to make that comeback possible. So, and they did it pretty well. They got broken through a couple times, by a first-round receiver in Matthew Goldman. But a lot of times they stood their ground against one of the top offenses in the country last year. And if they could just be anywhere close to that throughout the season, they're going to be a really scary defense.
Yeah, no, that defense was really good in that game, especially in that second half towards the end. I think they are for sure the favorites going into this year, but they know this story better than anyone. This conference is anyone's.
All right, moving on. Next team up, the Baylor Bears. We both had these. If you look at the rankings, they say middle of the pack, but like we were saying, 8 or 9 teams go in the conference. Baylor's one of them, at least in my opinion. Sawyer Robinson, top 3 quarterback in the conference, I'd say. And they just bring back a ton of production. Defensively, they were pretty good last year, but I think they're going to be really good defensively this year. I think they could be one of the top defenses in the conference, up there with Arizona State. I liked a lot of the additions they brought in through the portal to build on that defense. Travion Barnes is one guy who I really like at that inside linebacker spot, who I feel like is going to make a splash early on in the season. And look, they play week 1 Friday night, I think, against Auburn. They host Auburn. I feel like that's going to be a really good game. I give Baylor a chance to win that game. I don't think they will, but I feel like they definitely have a chance to shock some people and win that game.
Yeah, I mean that's going to be a tough game for them. I mean, the Big 12 just opponents, and I will say the battle between Sawyer Robertson and Jackson Arnold could be interesting. Jackson Arnold's first year with Auburn, and Sawyer Robertson's coming off a phenomenal year. Had 28 touchdowns, 3,000 yards, over 60% completion percentage in his first year as Baylor's starter. Had a really solid game, actually, against LSU last year. In the bowl game, 450 yards, 2 touchdowns. So, and he finished the season really well. His last 3 games, he was up over 65% completion percentage. Could be in for another good year. They bring back Josh Cameron, 750 yards last year. Could be in for another breakout year. And Bryson Washington, 1,000-yard season last year, 12 touchdowns. It allows the Bears to rely on the run a little bit more. And they actually have 2 tough games to start the year. They have Auburn at home, and then they got SMU on the road. SMU right now, no joke, after they showed last year that they can win the ACC. So it should be an interesting year for the Bears.
Now, speaking of their offense, you mentioned Josh Cameron, who's a really good weapon out there at receiver, but other than him, they looked kind of thin at the end of last season. They loaded up in the offseason. They got 6 receivers out of the transfer portal, and then they brought in 2 really talented guys out of high school. So there's just so many weapons that I think they could throw at wideout. Kobe Prentice, I think, is my favorite out of those from Alabama. Just a really good separator and just creating space. So I feel like with Bryson Washington and that threat at running back, and then you have a really good quarterback, but now you have a more well-rounded receiver room. It's a pretty good offense. At least the rest of people want.
You know what else you have?
What?
An entire returning offensive line.
That also helps.
All 5 guys have at least been in the program their entire college career. Or at least the last 2 years now. So that'll be nice to have for the Bears.
I feel like that's one of the most important positions to kind of have, I guess.
A big returning crew.
Big return, yeah. Because I feel like receivers you can plug and play. Running backs you can plug and play to the system, but I feel like you really get linemen at their best when you've had them for a couple of years.
Yeah. I don't know. The more I'm looking at this team, the more I'm starting to like them.
Okay. All right, moving on. Next is BYU. Now, clarify for me. Did we put these rankings out before all of that quarterback drama happened with them, or after?
Definitely
before,
after.
Right? After? Okay. Even still, I think outside of that, I still have them as one of the better teams in the conference. I have them at 5 above Baylor. I think even with that whole fiasco going on and that guy going to Tulane, I still think they'll be good enough to like alleviate the loss of a projected starting quarterback. And this was the team 11-2 last year. They just missed out on the conference championship by a tiebreaker because they lost to Arizona State at the end of the year. I mean, we thought this was going to be a playoff team, and they just kind of fell apart at the end of the year. I feel like a little bit better this year. They can maybe keep it together. And I don't know if they're necessarily due for a playoff push. I feel like they definitely can win the conference, but I don't know. As far as Big 12 schedules go, they have, I think, a really hard one.
Yeah. It is going to be a tougher Big 12 schedule. You've got Utah, you've got Iowa State, you've got Tech, TCU.
those were the main 3 games I was looking at. That 3-week stretch or 4-week stretch with a bye week in between Iowa State and Texas Tech. That's gonna decide their season right there. Those 3, if they can win 2 of those games, I feel like they can win the conference.
Yeah, I don't know. I think West Virginia could definitely make a case against them. I think TCU is going to be a tough opponent. Colorado's not going to be an easy environment to go into, especially because that'll be both their first Big 12 games of the season. And you've got a first-time starting quarterback in McKay Hillstead. It's going to be a tough year, I feel like, for BYU just because of what happened. And it's honestly just something you can't really control.
All right, moving on. The Cincinnati Bearcats were not one of the better teams in the conference last year, and I think that will stay consistent this year. I have them at 13. You had them all the way down at 15, which is second to last. They have some good pieces. They brought in a lot of receivers through the transfer portal. They brought in Tyree Walker, who I think is probably going to be the focal point of the offense. And they brought in a couple pieces on defense. They do have a couple pieces that I like on defense. One of them that they brought in was Matthew McDoom from Coastal Carolina. Awesome name, by the way.
Yeah, I was gonna say, dude.
Just say top to bottom. I just don't think this roster can stand up to the rest of the conference.
No, yeah. There's not a lot of excitement. They didn't really have the best class in the Big 12 either. Didn't really bring in a lot of players. And then you
second to last in recruiting.
Yeah, it was a pretty rough class overall. Yeah, 15th. Just not great. And then you really don't have the hardest Big 12 schedule, I don't think, but you don't play any necessarily easy opponents. You go on the road to Kansas. You've got Iowa State. UCF isn't the toughest opponent in the conference, but you're Cincinnati. You're not the best team either. So that I feel like that game could be a toss-up. Oklahoma State on the road could also be a toss-up just because Oklahoma State's been struggling lately, but I think Oklahoma State can handle that one. And then you've got Baylor, Utah, Arizona, BYU, and TCU to round out the year. It's just I don't see a great year for them.
All right, moving on to probably the most publicized team in the Big 12, Colorado Buffaloes. No more Travis Hunter, no more Shadur Sanders. So kind of, I guess, a new identity surrounding this Colorado team than what they were the past 2 years. They still have some really good players. They brought in Caden Salter from Liberty. I think he's going to be just fine stepping in at quarterback. Williams Joseph is a receiver they got in the transfer portal. I think he's going to be really good. But a lot of the additions that I like that they made were in the trenches, especially on the offensive side, because that was one of the weak points of this team the past few years was they didn't really have a good offensive line, weren't really good at pass protection. They couldn't run the ball that well. Dallin Hayden going into his 4th year, I think he'll be much improved. And behind this better offensive line with 3 transfers projected to make the starting lineup, I feel like they could be a much more well-rounded offense than what we saw from a very pass-heavy offense the last 2 years.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think this team will be a lot more balanced this year. I don't think it'll be super, pass-heavy because you did have one of the best receivers in the country in Travis Hunter, and it'll be tough to replace those 2 guys. They're both very solid. They were both very solid players. Travis Hunter, obviously considered the best player in the country. He wasn't necessarily my Heisman, but you look at it, it should be a fun schedule. I feel like they've got BYU, who they were supposed to play in the Big 12 championship game, but neither of them made it. Then you have on the road at TCU, you've got Iowa State at home. I think Iowa State is one of the most quietly rated teams in the Big 12. Like, you don't get a lot of news about them, but they're a pretty good team. You've got Utah, Arizona, West Virginia, Arizona State, and Kansas State. A couple of easier games in there, but should be a very competitive year for the Buffaloes.
I don't know about you, man. You missed a pretty big spot in their schedule. Week 1, Friday night against Georgia Tech at home. I know that Friday the 29th, I'm gonna have Baylor Auburn on one screen, and I'm gonna have this game on the other screen. I feel like this is a quick strike to define Colorado season. If they play well in this game, I think we can expect a pretty good team. Now, if they get demolished at home, different story. But I feel like it's going to be a pretty good gauge of where we're at with this Colorado team week 1. All right, next up is the Houston Cougars, who I said there's probably about 8 or 9 teams that can win the conference. Houston is my first team out, who I don't think can.
You think you're Joe Lenardi or something?
All right. Anyways, they brought in Connor Weigman from Texas A&M, who was supposed to be really good starter for A&M last year, had like one good game. And by like one good game, I mean he had one good game, where Texas A&M blew out Mizzou. But other than that, they're just, especially this LSU game, 6 for 18 for 64 yards, and then I think that's the game he got pulled in.
Also, 12 for 30 against Notre Dame at home with 2 interceptions.
That's also pretty bad. Yeah, so he'll be coming in looking for a fresh start after losing the job at A&M to Marcel Reed. Houston, a team, they got a lot of new pieces from the transfer portal. I think they brought in 30 transfers. So expecting, I think it's 6 new starters on offense and then 5 on defense. So pretty much half the starting lineup's going to be new additions through the portal. Yeah, I just don't think this is that good of a team. I have them at the middle of the pack now, but I wouldn't be surprised if they would finish closer to the bottom.
Yeah, I don't disagree. They've brought in some transfers that I think could have good seasons with Houston, just because they don't really have a tough schedule. They've got a couple of in-state opponents in Stephen F. Austin and Rice, and then they've got Oregon State. So those 3 out-of-conference opponents, not the toughest. They've got Tech, and they've got Arizona State, Colorado as well, and then TCU and Baylor to round out the year. Those are probably their toughest games. I think, I wouldn't be surprised if they beat UCF. Wouldn't be surprised if they beat West Virginia, Arizona, Oklahoma State. I just don't think they necessarily will. But they brought in a linebacker, Jesus Machado, at a Tulane that I actually kind of like. He had 98 tackles last year for Tulane and 3 tackles for loss, along with an interception. It's a pretty solid year. And to come into the Big 12 as a starting linebacker now, maybe get your name out there a little bit more. I think he could have a pretty solid season for Houston.
Now, one strong spot I like for this Houston team would be their receivers. They brought in Amari Thomas from UAB, who had a pretty solid year last year. I think he's one of the more physically gifted guys on this squad. He's listed at 6'2", 205, which is big for a receiver. So I'm expecting I don't want to say breakout, but a pretty good jump from him this year. I feel like if the receiving core can be kind of good, there's outside of Thomas, there's other guys like Kobe Young, Stephon Johnson. I don't know if it's Steven or Stephon. And then Mekhi Muse is another guy that I really like. But I feel like if their offense is going to be somewhat good, it's going to be A, on the quarterback, and B, on these receivers to kind of create production. All right, next team up, the conference runner-ups, the Iowa State Cyclones. I'm not going to lie to you. I went into conference championship weekend last year thinking they were going to end up with a playoff spot. They got decimated by Arizona State. The defense, I think, has to be better this year if they want to contend again, as you clearly saw in that Big 12 championship game. They had some good games, but I feel like they just got to be more consistent. But overall, not too many new additions. I feel like Rocco Becht is a really good quarterback in that conference, somewhere around that top 5 range up there with Robinson and Levitt. But I have them at 2 right now. Again, I think they can win the conference, but I just don't think they're as deep as some of these other teams.
No, I don't think you're wrong. I think they're where they lack in depth, they gain in experience. I feel like this is one of the more experienced teams, especially just playing together. They've got 9 returning guys on the defensive side and 9 returning guys on the offensive side. And then you look at their second string players, they've got 8 returning guys in the second string on defense and 9 returning guys in the second string on offense. So they've got a lot of playing time together. This is probably a really close knit group. Rocco Becht is in his junior season, and he's had good years, both his redshirt freshman year and his sophomore year. He went over 3,000 both years. He had 20 touchdowns, less than 10 interceptions both years. I think he's due for another big jump this year. When it comes to his completion percentage, that's like the only area where I think he can really improve. Truly, I think 3,500 yards and 20 to 30 touchdowns as a quarterback is great. If you can do that for me, you can have the starting job. I think
Now,
Carson Hansen is going to be even better in his second season. I think they've just got a lot of guys returning that I think will be a lot better this year.
Now, one area in particular that I wanted to address for them, they made a lot of additions at receiver, both portal and recruits, but there's 2 in particular I wanted to mention. Chase Sowell, who was a wide receiver transfer from East Carolina, had 600 yards the last 2 years. I think he's due for a really good year for them, especially with such a quarterback that's Becht. But then a freshman they brought in, Zay Robinson. I don't know if immediately he's going to have an impact, but I feel like as the year goes on and this guy gets better and better and he sees some more snaps here and there, I feel like towards the end of the year he could really break onto the scene as just a young star for this team. And if they do eventually go for a conference championship, I feel like he can make an impact in those big games.
Yeah. I'm looking at their schedule right now. It's relatively winnable for the first for the first 6 weeks. And then they get to Colorado, BYU, Arizona State, and TCU. They've got 4 games, and even Kansas. I'd throw 5 games just down the stretch that will make or break their season. Because if they don't win, probably, I'd say 3 out of 5 of those games, they probably find themselves in 3rd or 4th in the conference. Especially in that game against Arizona State. I think that game could determine, whether one of them makes it or not.
All right, next team up is the Kansas Jayhawks. This is another team that I have just outside of that able to win the conference range. I have them behind Arizona and Houston. I just feel like the turnover, they lost too many, star players. They lost Devin Neal, a 1,200-yard rusher. They lost Kobe Bryant on the defensive end. They do bring back Jalen Daniels for another year. Hopefully we'll be better this year. A little disappointing last year. Underperformed to what people were expecting from it. But they bring in a whole new receiving group, which I feel like is a lot to get adjusted to. I don't know. There's not a lot of parts about this Kansas team that I'm particularly high on.
I'm looking at all their transfer players that they brought in. Really, they have one guy who really made an impact on his previous team, and it's Joseph Sipp Jr., the linebacker from Bowling Green. He had 7 sacks last year, which is that's a big contribution to a team. But a lot of the guys that they brought in just weren't big impact guys on their previous teams, and that's probably why they left. But I guess Cam Pickett, 50 catches, 500 yards, pretty good. But Emmanuel Henderson, 4 catches, 82 yards, and then Bryson Canty from Columbia, who's not a Division I team, not always going to see the greatest production out of that. And then LaShawn Williams out of Iowa had 11 carries for 21 yards. So just a lot of guys, especially on the offensive side, that just didn't bring that aren't bringing over a lot of production.
You touched on it a bit there, but with the addition of Joseph Sipp Jr., they bring back a couple guys like DJ Withers and Dean Miller. I feel like the strength of this Kansas team is going to be their front seven, and more specifically their pass rush. I feel like that's what's if their defense is going to carry them through games, that's how it's going to be, is putting pressure on the quarterback.
Yeah, they've got their first two games into the season will definitely be probably two of their bigger games, but not like big games. Just to get that team used to each other. They've got Fresno State and Wagner, not good opponents, obviously, but they're just they're games so that Jalen Daniels can get in tune with his receivers. Uh, LaShawn Williams can get a couple of carries in and get some big gainers in there. And then they go to Mizzou. They renew that rivalry, the border war. Should be an interesting game to say the least. And then they've got not the toughest. They've got their easy opponents. They've got Tech and Kansas State and Iowa State and Utah. Those are probably their four hardest games this year, in conference. But other than that, I think they could. I think they could probably manage a 5-3 or 6-2, or 5-4, 6-3 record, 7-2 record in the Big 12.
All right, moving on to the other team in Kansas, the Kansas State Wildcats. A team that we both think is going to be very good this year. I have them at 3, you have them at 4. They were up there last year in the standings, and they bring back a lot of guys. Dylan Edwards, is back for another year. Avery Johnson is back for another year of starting after they turned the offense over to him last year. I wonder what happened to the quarterback they pushed out in favor for him. Do you know what happened to him?
No clue. Could not tell you to save my life.
No way he won the national championship or anything. Anyways,
No, there's no way.
I feel like a strength of this Kansas State team is going to be their defense. They're one of the deeper teams, especially on defense, in the Big 12. And I will say this right now. Lincoln Cure is probably going to be one of the best young players in the country. 5-star tight end that they got in the past recruiting cycle. They're not going to be able to keep him on the bench for long. The number 1 tight end in the country, he is going to make an impact at some point in this season. I'm actually really excited to watch that.
Yeah, I'd be willing to bet he gets into games probably starting as soon as the season starts.
I could see that as well.
Yeah, but they that first game against Iowa State will be a very interesting one and could be a really good one. Both of those teams looking like they're going to be contending for the Big 12 title, early on and throughout the season. They've got a fun schedule, I'd say. It'll be a tough one, but I think it's one that they can handle. They've got, towards the end of the season, they've got their usual Big 12 foes in Baylor, TCU, Kansas Tech, and then they've got a couple of new ones in Utah and Colorado. Those guys in their second year in the conference. But it should be a fun schedule for them. I think they'll have a lot of good games, and I think they'll have a lot of exciting games. Now, could I also see them finishing in the middle of the pack because of that? Yes.
All right, moving on to the Oklahoma State Cowboys. This is a team last year just projected to finish so well and so highly in the Big 12, and then it just all came down, man. 3-9. He went into the year with a Heisman candidate and Ollie Gordon. He didn't have the year he was looking for. He's now gone to the NFL. It's just they didn't really have anything going for them last year, and I feel like head coach Mike Gundy thought that too. Went out and got 41 new players out of the portal. So they're going to be looking at a completely new group, especially on defense. 8 projected starters are from the portal. And there's just not much that we know about them yet just because it's such a different team than it was last year.
Yeah, I think you're right. There's a lot of that defense is going to be completely new. The entire linebacking core is new. At least the projected starters, they've got 1 returning linebacker. But it's a lot of transfers. It's a lot of guys you got to get, in to a groove, and then I believe, it's Zane Flores' first year as a starter. So that's not going to be easy. Coming in with a lot of new transfers. You've got Ao Shaddamide King, who doesn't have any recorded stats. You've got a bunch of guys that it feels like a reset year almost for Oklahoma State. Dwayne Lofton, who's returning, also doesn't have any recorded stats. It's just, it's a lot of guys.
It's a fresh air like of a team, but you just don't know, because especially a lot of these guys are so unproven that you don't know if they're gonna click the right way. So I can't put them any higher than where they're at. Like,
And then week 2 at Oregon isn't really helping.
that doesn't help at all.
Yeah, I feel like it'd be cool to see them be good this year, just because I feel like I kind of feel like they were cheated out of a good year, just because they weren't good. Like, nothing that like anybody affected their games, but I just feel like they should get a good year back. So it'd be cool to see them be good. I just don't think they will.
I still don't know how they just weren't good last year when all the talent they returned and everybody thinking they were going to be good. It just, I don't know. I don't know how it falls that flat. And it's unlike a situation like, I don't know, Florida State last year, where it's, it's you're expecting them to be good, but it's still a fairly new team. They brought in a lot of new guys. They had a lot of returning guys last year, and they just didn't pan out the way everybody thought they were going to pan out.
Yeah, there were just a lot. Yeah, there were just a lot of games that they lost that they shouldn't have. Like, early on in the year, they were beating up on South Dakota State and Tulsa. They had a really good win against Arkansas. They came back in that one. That one was a really exciting one to watch. But there's just every game after that, it was just that Utah loss. I feel like just they couldn't get out from it, and every single game after that was just awful. I mean, 42-20 loss to K-State, 38-14 to West Virginia, a 38-28 loss to Baylor, 42-21 to Arizona State, 38-13 to TCU, and then a 56-48 Texas Tech loss and a 52-0 Colorado loss to round out the year.
All right, moving on. The TCU Horned Frogs. The Frogs in purple. Just to start off, looking at their schedule, I think they have, especially out of conference, at North Carolina Monday night, week 1. They get a fairly easy game the next week, but then they host SMU. And then that's where their conference slate begins after that. Really hard schedule for TCU. So that, I don't know, that made me a little bit lower than, or maybe rate them a little bit lower than I think the quality of team they are. They went 8-4 last year, 6-3 in the conference, and they have some really good players. Bud Clark, a safety on defense, is one that I really like. I think he's top 10 safety in the country. I don't know. It's just a lot of hard games for them. They don't really have any, I guess, downtime to kind of collect themselves after, week to week.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think this team is going to be competitive in a lot of its games. I think they can go in to Chapel Hill and win against North Carolina. I actually think it'll be a good game against SMU. That's a pretty big rivalry. Both Dallas schools, both Christian schools. It'll be a good game. And then Arizona State, Colorado, Kansas State to start off your conference slate. Only one of those is at home. That's not really easy. That's not exactly what you want. But Josh Hoover, coming into his third year starting, threw for almost 4,000 yards last year, had 27 touchdowns and 11 interceptions. Really good player. I think he'll be really good this year. Trent Battle didn't really have the best year. He had 44 carries and 180 yards, but that's a 4.2 average. I think he'll be a lot better this year. So they brought in a pair of transfer receivers in Jordan Dwyer and Joseph Manjack IV. I think they're both solid players. Eric McAllister is back again this year. He should be good once again. He had 40 catches and 760 yards last year. So a very solid returning squad on the offensive side, and they return five offensive tackles or offensive linemen. Not necessarily all of them were starting, but they're all back again for a second year with the program.
All right, moving on. The Texas Tech Red Raiders. If you think about modern college football and the way that some of these teams choose to build through NIL and the transfer portal, one of the teams you should think of is Texas Tech, without question. They just get out and get so much talent year to year. They brought in 18 4-stars this last transfer cycle. They're one of the best transfer portal teams in the country, not even in the conference. They were the best in the conference, but just one of the best in the country. And they got so many guys who are, a lot of these teams, when they go out and get a lot of guys in the transfer portal, a lot of them are just roster fillers. They had a lot of guys who I think are impact players. Howard Sampson, a tackle from North Carolina, I think is really good. Romello Height, an edge rusher they got from Georgia Tech. I think he's going to have a monster year. And then they had that whole deal with Micah Hudson leaving, who ended up coming back. I still don't know what the deal with that was, but they do get that talented receiver back this year. And I think this is going to be one of the best teams in the conference.
Yeah, I think after, a top 2 class in the country in the transfer portal, it's kind of hard not to think that they're going to be strong competitors in the conference this year. And I agree with you. I a little bit higher on them after that recruiting cycle. Wasn't super high on them last year. Just I didn't see them doing very well, and I didn't think that they would do very well heading into this year until that transfer portal. They had a pretty solid year last year. They went 8-4. They've got a pretty tough road schedule. They go to Utah, they go to Arizona State, to Kansas State. So some of those tougher in-conference opponents they've got to play on the road. But I see them doing very well this year.
And one guy who I didn't mention when talking about a bunch of transfers they brought in was Quentin Joyner. Actually, I think he's probably going to be the most impactful for them. He didn't exactly light it up last year at USC. It's a pretty stacked running back room, in just in terms of top to bottom depth. But now he gets to come in and be the de facto starter for the Red Raiders. He's just a really physical runner. I feel like he could push 800-900 yards this year. All right, next up, the UCF Golden Knights, who I don't know, do I say first year head coach since he's technically their new coach, or do I say something else because he's been there before? Under first year head coach Scott Frost coming back in after Gus Malzahn left to be the offensive coordinator at Florida State. And he changed a lot of things around over the offseason. At least looking at projected starters, 7 new projected starters from the portal on defense and 8 on offense. So he obviously didn't like what they had last year and went out and got a bunch of new personnel. They did get some decent recruits in just their regular recruiting class. Tavion Swint, running back, is one, and then Tony Williams, a safety, as another. Both guys I really like and could develop into solid pieces for them. But top to bottom with the roster, there's too many questions. It's a first-year coach. I still say first year with air quotes. But it's a new system, a new coach, just a complete overhaul. I mean, we both have them at the bottom of the conference.
Yeah, so. I mean, it's like you said, first year head coach. With a new team, brings in 17 new starters. It's just tough in-conference schedule. There's not a lot going. There's still a lot of identity to be found. If they win any more than 3 in-conference games, that's a win in my book.
All right. Moving on to the Utah Utes, who are finally free of the clutches of Cam Rising. No, not really. Cam Rising was a good quarterback. Just was always injured, never getting a groove. They're coming in for the first time in a while with a new expected starter. The defense, though, does return a lot of guys. They only brought in 1 projected starter from the transfer portal on defense as Blake Cotton. at that cornerback slot. Everybody else has been there before. But the offense, especially, they brought a lot of new skill positions in. New running back, new quarterback, 3 new receivers. They brought in the new tight end. I still think Dallin Bentley's going to be the starting tight end. But Otto Tia as a new tight end they brought in. And if the offense clicks like as we think we're going to click with all these new pieces, I feel like it's going to be a much better year than it was last year at 5-7 for the Utes. You think so too? You had them all the way ranked 5, didn't you?
I think this team is going to be in a position where if the offense can just hold on to the ball, if the offense can just not turn the ball over, they'll be fine. If they have to punt, 4 to 5 times a game, but they're still putting 20 to 27 on the board, they're just making the opposing team drive down the field. I think this is a defense that's going to be really tough to play against, and I could see them doing really well if that's the case. But Devin Dampier, the transfer quarterback that they brought in, had 12 touchdowns and 12 interceptions last year. Had a lot of trouble turning the ball over. If he can, lower those turnover numbers a lot and throw up a couple more touchdowns, they'll probably have one of the worser rated offenses in the country, but I think they'll have a top defense.
And it's not just the fact that these turnovers by Dampier last year were like that he had a lot of them. It's the fact that they would stack in certain games. There'd be games he'd be perfectly fine throwing the football, no mistakes, no turnovers. But when he did make mistakes, they just piled on. I mean, you're looking here. They have the 1 pick against Wyoming, 2 against Colorado State, 3 against Utah State, 2 against Fresno State, 2 against Auburn, 2 against Arizona. That will kill your entire offense if you turn the ball over multiple times a game. It's just, it's, I don't think people realize how much of an offensive killer it is if multiple times a game you're just giving the other team the ball for free. If you want to be successful, you can't do that.
Now, I will say, you're looking at his numbers. He's throwing the ball. In the games where he had multiple interceptions, he threw the ball 40 plus times. 4 of those 5 games. The only game where he didn't have 40 plus throws, and he had multiple interceptions was against Utah State. But every other game where he didn't have multiple interceptions, he was throwing the ball almost less than 30 times in each of those.
Now, hopefully, Utah won't have to be as pass heavy as the situation he was in last year, and he won't have to throw the ball that many times, and maybe that will help limit the turnovers a little bit. But to be fair, there's still, even with all the throws, how did he only have 12 touchdowns if he's throwing 40 times a game?
Because he was completing around half of them.
Yeah, it's still not good. So I feel like a lot of their success is going to be built on him.
Yeah. Also, before we move on, I'd like to mention the Utes is probably one of my favorite team names.
The Utes.
It's just funny to me.
All right, last team for the Big 12 Conference, the West Virginia Mountaineers. Another team that brought in a lot of guys through the portal, and by a lot, I mean 52. That's pretty much half your roster. Brought in solely through the transfer portal. And unlike some of the guys that we were talking about for Texas Tech, they brought in a lot of just depth. They felt they were thin at a lot of positions, so they brought in a bunch of guys to just be there for depth purposes. Now, a lot of them are going to start too. A lot of them are going to impact. But, I mean, man, there are so many new faces on this team.
Yeah, you mentioned depth. Their entire second string on offense is transfers.
It's all transfers. It's all transfers.
No, I mean, yeah, I think this is one of those teams where if they click, they're going to click, but I don't necessarily see that happening. I think they'll do fine in the Big 12 this year. I think they'll be a trap game for a lot of teams. I think that TCU game will be a trap game for the Horned Frogs, and I think that Texas Tech game, that last week of the season, is going to be a trap game for sure.
Now, with all the transfers coming in, their projected starter quarterback is not a transfer. He's been in the system for 2 years. Nico Martial. So hopefully that's an advantage because I feel like there's a huge difference between having a transfer quarterback as opposed to having a guy who's been in your offense for a few years and who knows, I guess, how to go about playing quarterback in that specific system. Which I feel like is why a lot of these transfer guys just don't pan out. Even if they see them play good at other schools, it's just that it's not enough time to get used to a new system. But I feel like with being in this West Virginia system for 2 years, I feel like at quarterback, they'll be just fine, even if it's a first-time full starter. All right, and that is all 16 teams in the Big 12. You know what that's time for. It's time for our conference championship predictions. Ryan, who do you got?
I'm gonna go the two teams that I have playing in the conference championship this year. I'm gonna go with the Utah Utes and the Iowa State Cyclones. I like both their teams. I think if Dampier can just control the turnovers, I think the Utes will be one of the better teams, and I think they'll be a bit of a shock. But I will have the Cyclones winning that one. I think they're going to be coming out for blood this year.
I think for once, and out of the 3 episodes we've done, we don't have similar teams in the conference championship. My conference championship predictions, I am going to have the Texas Tech Red Raiders and the Baylor Bears as my 2 teams. I feel like Texas Tech, they just brought in too much talent through the portal for it just not to equal a very good season. I mean, like we said, number 2 portal class in the country. They brought in just so many good players. I think that they're going to have success this year. And then Baylor, on the other hand, I feel like the 1-2 punch of Sawyer Robinson and Bryson Washington coming in this year is just going to make their offense lethal. And I already think their defense is pretty good. I feel like they're going to steal some games that a lot of people are going to think maybe they shouldn't, especially week 1. I feel like they're going to win against Auburn. I feel like they could win against Auburn. I'm not going to say I think they will. I think they have a real chance in that game. But in conference, I think they're going to go through their schedule pretty easily. And I see them at the end in Austin for that conference championship. All right, and that concludes episode 3 of the Pre-Snap Pressure podcast. We will be back next week, same style of video for the last Power 4 conference, the ACC. And then guess what? The week after that, it's time for college football. I cannot wait. Literally cannot go by any faster.
Dude, I'm trying to play college football to make it not seem as far, and I can't play that game, dude. It's so frustrating. I've gotten to...
No.
It's got to a point where, like, I'll throw a play, and my receivers will run into the defenders, and the defenders, like, push them off of their route, and it's an incompletion, and it's 4th down, and I'm like, what am I supposed to do now?
No, I was minding my own business yesterday doing, I don't know, I think it was just watching highlights or something. My dad calls me, and he goes, the game cheats. That's the first thing he said, this game cheats. And that's all he said. He was talking about how the bug in the game where they... if you're trying to kneel at the clock, the other team will just have injuries. So there'll be just injury timeouts, and you can't run out the clock. He said he tried to take a knee 3 straight times in the game, and it was just injury timeout, injury timeout, injury timeout.
Oh, I didn't even know that was a thing, dude. That's frustrating. The whole point of taking a knee is, like, is that the clock runs down.
I don't know. It seems Lane Kiffin had a word on the CFP 26 game. Anyways, that's going to do it for us for episode 3. Once again, see you back next Tuesday for the ACC preview. And then after that, it's on to week 0. So we will see you guys next week.